Well, thank you so much for having me on, Vanessa. Yes, I mean, since the 7th of October, I felt, like lots of people, a mixture of shock, of fear, of anger, and also of determination. The horrible attack that we saw on the 7th of October were things that, I can't even describe because they were so awful, not only perpetrated by the Hamas terrorists, but filmed and celebrated, just is a huge shock to the system and a huge shock to humanity, I would say.
The word pogrom has been used more than I've ever heard it in my life, and I'm someone who grew up with that word in my family. My father used to use it all the time to describe, the reason why my family was in the United Kingdom in the first place, and also a kind of perpetual fear of some kind of anti-Semitic reprisal. There might be a pogrom here, Vanessa, and I would think, Dad, this was a long, long time ago. This is not something that will ever happen now, not something that we'll ever see, and yet what happened on just 11 days ago has been described by very many people, including the Prime Minister, as a pogrom.
It's a strong word, but it's a correct word. This is the biggest loss of Jewish life in a single day since the Holocaust. We lost a family friend in that initial attack.
Oh, I'm very sorry.
No, thank you. It's just an appalling thing. And of course, there are so many hostages now. We think about 200 in the Gaza Strip. We don't know the situation that they're in. Some of them were paraded in the street as trophies. It's really hard to fathom this. And we're left in a very fearful state about the fate that reaches those people, the fate of Israelis who are constantly under rocket fire, the fate of the reservists who've been called up, but also of the Palestinians who now live, because of Hamas's actions, in a very uncertain and scary situation. We don't want that either.
So what do you imagine will happen now? Because I know it's hard to see into the future, but yet, every paper in this country is printing, guides to the possible ramifications in Lebanon and in Syria and in Egypt. And, you look at this and you see the kind of potential for the most terrible spreading of conflict and the most monumental loss of life.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm not a military expert in the way that your previous speakers were, but it is important to have Israel win and Hamas lose, both for Israelis, for us in terms of our values, and also for Palestinians. We've seen that a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket hit a hospital, possibly killed 500 people. And what has been lost in that is that this is a terrorist organization that fires from civilian population into civilian populations. A friend of mine is a paramedic at an Israeli hospital. They're constantly having rocket fire against that hospital. They've had to evacuate the emergency room there over and over and over again. This is what we're dealing with, and I think it's really important for us, for the Israelis, for Palestinians, that these terrorists are defeated.
Right, while you're sitting here talking to me on talkTV, demonstrators have been gathering outside Downing Street this evening in support of Palestine. One of the speakers was Chris Rose, the director of the human rights organisation Amos Trust, who recalled the moment he heard about the hospital explosion.
We were giving an update on the situation when the awful news came through that the hospital had been bombed and hundreds of people were dead. And at that time we had no idea if our staff, our friends, our colleagues were dead or if they were alive. That morning I had spoken to I messaged with the head of social work there, had said, we're all dying in Gaza. There's no fuel, there's no water, and there's hundreds who've escaped to the hospital.
Obviously, an existential crisis of the very worst kind, and the marginally optimistic news is that at least some aid is going to be allowed through the Rafah Gate in Egypt. Some people haven't understood why Egypt doesn't let some of the people fleeing into its country to kind of embrace them and look after them in the same way that the Polish did to Ukrainian refugees.
I think that they'd be frightened about how long this is going to play out and whether they want them there. Also, remember that Egypt faces an internal threat from extremist Islamists in the form of the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is the Gazan offshoot or the Palestinian offshoot. So they'd be very worried about having extremists and terrorists coming into their own territory. So that's probably part of their concern as well. But it's good news that aid can get in. We don't want to see, none of us want to see Palestinians suffer for the actions of Hamas. We just want to see Hamas and its terror defeated so that peace can again reign in that region.
When we say Hamas, and we too.
Hamas is a Sunni group, which is a Palestinian nationalist Islamist group, whereas Hezbollah is a Lebanese Shia Muslim group backed primarily by Iran. In fact, they're both backed by Iran. Hezbollah is bigger and better trained. So it is of concern that there are skirmishes, as one of your previous speakers said. But yes, I mean, they are both Islamist extremist organizations and are a threat to regional and global peace.
When we talk about a two-state solution, as far as you're concerned, A, what does that mean? And B, is it a possible, is it a pragmatic, is it a viable idea?
I would like to see a two-state solution. It's been certainly pushed back by Hamas's actions because Israel will say, well, how can we know that we'd have security if there was that solution? But I think one of the things, as well as the military response, which is unfortunately going to be necessary, one of the things we need here is Israeli security and Palestinian hope. And those are things that we need. One of the things that Hamas was clearly trying to do here was derail the Abraham Accords and a possible peace agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And one of the ways to defeat Hamas would be to get that back on track and to bring more regional peace, because Hamas wants chaos, it wants violence. But actually, many of us, many people in the region, many Israelis, many Palestinians, many Arabs more broadly want peace. And that's what we should be working towards in the longer term.